Zhe. I know many of you, and some of you traveled with me. I'm here not because I'm a historian, not because I'm a lecturer, though I love to talk. I'm a tour guide to Mexico and Central America, and since pandemic started, I kind of switched for doing Zoom talks on the subjects that I love. Um, and one of my favorite, though extremely sad but fascinating subject, the story, is the story of the conquest. And so I'll talk about that tonight. Um, I'm before we jump into the story itself, I'm wondering if we should. What do we do, Alina? What do we do about the mute button and stuff?
Yeah, can you guys mute yourselves? Because if I, or I can mute everyone, but then I'll mute Железняк also.
Just if possible, let people use the option so people can unmute themselves. Um,
Yeah.
we
Yeah, you just have to unmute yourself and
Yeah,
then
I
yeah.
unmuted myself. Um, so before I jump a couple um, practical points, we have a fair warning. Usually, the talk that I do, I have 9 days during my tours to deliver it, so I have unlimited time. Um, I love to talk, so during my lectures, I usually do it like two lectures, two series of two lectures, or sometimes like I would use 4 hours to do. So tonight is a very condensed thing. I did several dry runs. Um, I felt I did okay with the condensed version. We may need to kind of at the end, I may start collapsing things a little bit to finish on time. If you at the end of the lecture feels that you're interested in that subject fascinates you, or you just want to find out more, I have a very long and detailed recording of that I can probably pull out and share if that's okay with Alina, and we
And I'm
can
also recording this one,
we
so
can um, do something about that. But I'll try to fit in an hour and a half. Um, the other thing is because we have such a short time, um, let me know. You can unmute yourself if there are any technical problems, but otherwise, I'll probably just have a quick breaks just to um, have a sip of tea or something like that. But otherwise, we will be moving mostly nonstop. Um, and with that, I will go ahead. So the subjects of tonight's presentation, the original subject, is Hernan Cortés, Emperor Montezuma, and the first encounter and the last dance of two civilizations. This is the story of conquest of Mexico by a small but very well organized band of European adventurers. Really, we can call them white trash of Iberian Peninsula. Uh, and how the small army of originally just was 800 people were able to conquer a huge empire of really exotic brilliance. It's fascinating, but I said it's very, very sad. And the story, the details of that conquest of the 2 years, there was really just 2 years between the first encounter and the last dance, a very short time. The bulk of that conquest is pretty nuts and bolts of our presentation tonight. Before we go into all the details, I do need to provide you with some historical background, and so we will start with the background on the Kingdom of Spain. Kingdom of Spain. So the last decade of the 15th century, the 1490s, the young, recently united under the Christian crown, um, Kingdom of Spain, looking, among other things, into building a new trade routes into India and China, into the Indies, to conduct a very lucrative spice trade, very important for the economy of the country. Uh, One of the ways that potentially may work for the Spain is to go westwards unexpectedly, because there are people like this man, uh, the Genovese merchant, the very experienced seaman, a very able seaman, and the visionary. Because All of you know him. This is Cristobal Columbus. And he tries to convince the Spanish royal family that he can discover India or find the way to India and China by going westwards over Atlantics. He convinced royal monarchs of Spain to do that. And so in 1492, in August of that year, Columbus sails from Europe westwards. And in 2 years, indeed, he is successful. He reaches something. He reaches what we now called Caribbeans, but he at the time would make everybody called West Indies. He lands on some island that we actually currently don't even know where exactly he landed, but some island in the Caribbean. After few weeks of explorations, he finds enough massland, enough islands to claim by international law everything that he found for the crown of Spain. Pretty much one day, the crown of Spain find out that they becoming sort of an empire because now they have colonies very far away from the Iberian shores. For his efforts, Columbus is made admiral and made a viceroy with the mandate to pretty much rule all of those territories that he just found. Very unfortunately for Columbus, what he found is not at all what he was hoping to find. He found no India, he found no China. In fact, he discovered no advanced civilization to conduct any trade, not just lucrative trade, nothing out there. All he finds mostly swamps, mosquitoes, malaria, and very hostile natives that are not making good slaves. Even that he doesn't have. So Columbus is a butt of many jokes at the time. Actually, he's called the Admiral of Mosquito Bay. Not like Spanish didn't try. They tried to colonize north of South America, modern day Venezuela, and Central America, Panama, and even Florida. Ponce de Leon went there. Everything that they found is poor. Not just relatively poor. It's a very poor land. And the only exception is that big island in the middle of the Caribbean called Cuba. Cuba is prosperous colony, the best colony that Spain has, and it has a lot to do with the work of this man. This is governor of Cuba, and his name was Diego Velázquez. Not Diego Velázquez, the famous painter, but Diego Velázquez de Cuellar, um, conquistador and administrator. Velázquez's origins were rather modest and humble. His parents were less in ability in Castile, of very modest means. Yet he was able to get some sort of education and prove himself in his service to first their majesties and then to Columbus as a good soldier, good, smart officer, and a good administrator. He served as a kind of acting governor for the island of Hispaniola for a while, and then proving himself in 1506, Columbus's family gives him a task to go to the big island, Cuba, and to conquer it and to become its governor pending successful conquest. Velasquez performs Bozo's task with flying colors, really. He subjugates locals, converts them to slaves, and builds a very successful colony. He does a lot of things right that Columbus himself previously or any other administrators or governors of other lands were not doing properly. One of the biggest and the smartest thing he does when he discovers some gold deposits on Cuba, he uses money to build cities, the cities we still love today, Havana, Santiago de Cuba, Trinidad. If you ever go to Cuba, visit all those places, wonderful. I mean, really, really beautiful places. But he also invests in building ship industry. He develops wharves. And that's a very smart move because anybody ever since traveling from Europe to New World would stop at Cuba to fix the ships, to pick up the new ships, uh, pretty much due to his very smart management of resources. The Cuba was there to prosper, not just during the age of um, Velasquez, but also for centuries to come. Now, we jump 10 years, 1516. After 10 years of being the best governor, running the best colony that Spain had, previously modest Velasquez is not that modest anymore. He's kind of getting full of himself, and he's not happy about the king of that small Cuban kingdom. He wants to conquer more territories. And the only territory that hasn't been tried yet is due west, what's now modern Mexico, even though he doesn't know about the continental mass. All he sees right now, if he looks westwards, is that yellow mass called Yucatan. I mean, now called Yucatan. That's where he wants to send expeditions. And so he pays for several expeditions. He sponsored several expeditions westwards. And the first one in 1517 was a complete disaster. But the second expedition in 1518, led by his own nephew, Juan de Grijalva, is mostly successful. Juan de Grijalva is a good businessman. He finds friendly locals. He trades with them for gold and silver. He brings that back. He brings back reports, maps, interpreters, or like local mind used to be trained as interpreters, but mostly he brings information. And information is tremendously important. He says, well, that Yucatan Peninsula that we see, that's actually dull. There is nothing there. But if we go through over another sea that's now called Gulf of Mexico, if we go through that, there is land where there are friendly locals who trade for gold and silver, and also they inform us there is much more of the precious metals owned by the people who control the territory, the locals overlords called Mexica, the people that we now call Aztecs, locals call them Mexica. Um, That's exactly the thing that Velasquez wants to hear, but now the governor gets himself in a very difficult situation. There's two problems that he's facing. First, he already sponsored two expeditions, and even though Grijalva brought back some silver and gold, that not nearly enough to cover his expenses. So he kind of doesn't want to invest even more money into expeditions that he doesn't know whether they're going to be successful or not. The second thing is trickier. Um, from the reports he understands that wherever civilization up there in that continental mass past the second sea, past the Gulf of Mexico, is a barbarian, not necessarily barbarian, is a primitive civilizations compared to Europe, according to terminology that he uses, right? The primitives. And so it's much more appropriate to send people on the conquest and conquer the territory and have it join to kingdom of Spain, to domains of the Spain, rather than just trade with them. The problem that Velasquez had with sending the expedition of that sort is that he cannot. He's not authorized. He may think that he is the greatest thing and very full of himself, but he is not a king. He's not Columbus. He's not a viceroy. He's just a governor of that particular island of Cuba. He doesn't have authority, and he doesn't want to ask Columbus for permissions to go on the conquering expedition, on the warring expedition, for various political reasons. So Velasquez is looking for somebody to lead the third and hopefully final expeditions to conquer the territory, somebody who would be brave, smart, and audacious, and also has money. So somebody who would be business partner, but also somebody who, like, by going on officially trading expedition, at some point just use some sort of pretense, anything, to really stop trading and start taking, stealing, and looting. And he thinks that he has just the man, and the man is this person, one of the protagonist, antagonist of our main protagonist slash antagonist of our talk, Hernan Cortes. Now, Hernan Cortes is a young man from Extremadura. Extremadura is a province in Spain that um, should be should be known as Spanish Gascogne. And all of the young people coming from there are like D'Artagnans, just Spanish D'Artagnans. What that means? They mostly uneducated, and we're talking about noble people, like less nobility. They mostly uneducated and mostly they scornful of any education. They're pretty proud that most of them cannot read and write. Um, they don't care to study anything but the science of war. They're all great horsemen, all great swordsmen. They ready to fight anybody on behalf of king, and hopefully that's how they gonna make themselves some fortunes by going into the wars. Um, Besides that, as we know from D'Artagnan's and his friend's story, they can either fight or marry somebody of importance with money. There is no any other perspective for them. There any perspective for them back in Spain. Um, they also very religious. They're very chauvinistic. They don't care for anybody but Spaniards. Um, but they really like D'Artagnan's, all for one and one for all. They care for the other Castellans a lot, and especially for their um, for uh, for the people from Extremadura. That locality and supporting each other is extremely important for them. So brave, good soldiers, and not particularly nice people otherwise. Let's put that way. Um, Cortes is pretty much one of them, except for one huge exception. He is not scornful of education at all. He actually educated man. He is a bookworm. He attended the University of Salamanca, for God's sake. So he has brains, unlike most of his friends. In 1503, he decided that he will do better in the New World rather trying to make his career back home. He comes to Hispaniola, and he's lucky, and luck something that follows him, Cortes, a lot. He meets there Velasquez, who likes the young man, and Cortes pretty much becomes Velasquez's protege. He gets some government job, he works in the office, and then Velasquez is sent to conquer Cuba, as we remember, 3 years later in 1506. Cortes takes a part of conquest of Cuba and proves himself unexpectedly to many, not just a bookworm, but also a person who is actually a very good horseman, very good swordsman, and somebody who is not afraid to fight enemies. He is there to support his friends, and he is there to fight for them and to kill for them and to be injured for them. Um, it really goes a very long way for Cortes because he makes friends during this conquest with many extremadurans, and specifically with these two gentlemen. The one to the left is Pedro Alvarado, and the one to the right is I forgot his name. Well, the Yaga guy. Those are the um, two bad boys of conquest. Pedro Alvarado, in particular, is the most feared conquistadors of all time. He managed to uh, be everywhere. Whereas every single conquest, Peru, uh, North America, Honduras, Mexico, and he is feared by all other conquistadors. Diego Sandoval, his name. All right, and so Pedro Alvarado is the beast. Everybody's afraid of him. Sandoval is pretty much like Pedro, but with just a little bit more brains. And they take in liking of Cortes, and they become friends. And that's becoming very important for Cortes as well. Now, to this man, Velasquez approaches. Nobody's surprised that for his next expedition, Velasquez picks up Cortes because he is a Velasquez protege, but also he just recently became his nephew by law. Cortes marries Velasquez's niece. So Velasquez comes with his relatives, and they have a very secretive conversation in which nothing is spelled out directly, but pretty much uh, they have a conversation in which there is an understanding that Velasquez and Cortes gonna sponsor the expedition, and they're gonna call it a trading expedition, but Cortes is gonna use any pretense to start conquering territory if it makes sense. Nothing is said plainly, but most men had a very good understanding. Both are very pleased with the conversation. And so the paperwork is signed, and Cortes is made the head of expeditions that will take place next year. For a little while, the thing continued to be rosy, but just for a little while, because at some point the two men fell apart. And the reason is that Velasquez became paranoid. He became paranoid that Cortes is actually has a mind of his own and has agenda of his own. Became paranoid that Cortes, when he goes there, and since he's going to be breaking the law anyway by starting the conquering expedition from what starts as what needs to be just a trading expedition, he's not going to do it for the sake of Velasquez. He's going to do it for his own sake. If he conquers something, he's going to petition the king on his own behalf, not on behalf of the governor of Cuba. And um, um, interestingly enough, that was exactly the case when if you're paranoid, it doesn't mean that they're not after you. He was paranoid, and he was right. That's probably was Cortes's idea from the start. If I invest my own money, if I risk my own life, if I'm going from the safety of Cuba and a comfortable life here to that unknown lands, why I'm doing that for the person who stays in the government palace and risks nothing? The tipping point happened when Cortes started sponsoring additional ships, being start paying for more ships to be added to the uh, what originally was planned, and that finally he started appointing his friends, likes of Alvarado and Sandoval, to as his captains. That was enough for Velasquez, so he tried to break the contract and get Cortes to cancel. Cortes refused. That then Velasquez decided, all right, I see how it is. Now I have to take them by force. But before he could act, um, Cortes asked faster. He acted first, and what he did, he left the Santiago de Cuba, that was the capital, with as many ships as were ready ahead of schedule. They confiscated as much food from the stores that they could. They loaded them on the 4 out of 8 ships that he needed to have, and he got his men on the ships, and they left ahead of schedule without letting uh, Velasquez know or getting authorization. They did meet at some point on the shores, and pretty much Cortes passed Velasquez a message along the lines, "Go home, uncle, and chill." Yes, 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 you're right. I'm leaving. I'm going to do it all for myself because that's what the presidents want. But don't worry. When I come back, loved by kings, praised by everyone, being the richest person who conquered that land mass that I'm going to conquer, you're not going to regret. I'm going to reward you handsomely. Just go home and do nothing crazy. Bye, uncle. And he left, and he started moving westwards along the southern shores of Cuba. He had to make a number of stops because, as I said, he left um, prematurely. He needed to add ships. He needed to add people to his expeditions. He needed to hire the fighters. He needed more provision. Um, so he stopped in several places, including Havana, where he was able to add ships and add several horses and add people. But what's more important is that during that stage, the quality of Cortes that nobody seen before, nobody would mention before. The quality, a very important quality, became evident. He apparently nowadays he would be a cult leader. He was. It turns out that he is extremely charismatic and he can convince people to do his bidding just by talking to them. He developed, yeah, like cult type of speech in which he was talking about salvation that they were bringing to the poor pagan people, that they're doing the Jesus work by bringing those uh, poor souls close to Jesus, that they're crusaders, that they doing stuff that kings gonna laugh and gonna smile at them. He was talking about songs that will be sung about them like they were sung about crusaders. And of course, he was talking about gold and glory. Somehow, he was able to add 400 people to his expeditions, talking to the people who never actually thought before about going and fighting somewhere in some remote lands. He just was like, join me, and they would follow. That was amazing quality. One way and another, once he added the ships and added people and convinced even Velasquez's own official to join his expedition, in December of 1518, he left Cabo San Antonio and moved westwards. He traveled, according to using maps by Juan de Grijalva, alongside the Mayans land into the central Mexico, as you can see here. Now, as he was traveling around the Maya lands, he had reports from Grijalva that the Mayans were mostly very hostile, and one would expect him to skip these lands. No, Cortes would specifically land that, with the official goal of going and talking to these people were that we have to try to convert to Christianity everyone. The people who hostile specifically, we need to talk to them and try to bring them close to, I mean, we need to bring the salvation to them. The practical reason was that his army was newly formed. There was only 800 people. Some of them were very young, some of them were old. He wanted to give them military experience, and he wanted to boost morale, to show them that the Spanish armor, the Spanish steel, the firepower, and most of all, horses can overrun the bigger the armies, the much bigger numbers of local people who maybe have numbers, but they don't have military advantages that Spaniards have. And he was right. They were victorious in all the battles. Even few times they're on their luck and they were close to defeat. But yeah, that boosted morale. and it gave military experience to his army, which came very useful going forward. Now, as they travel, they came to the end of the green territories. You can see in Puerto Sidao, um, and this is where the Maya's territory of that time was ending, and the huge Aztec Empire, the Mexica Empire, would start. Cortes didn't know that. What he realized coming to Puerto de Sidao is that people speak different languages there, because Mayans speak Mayan languages, and people of the central Mexico were speaking Aztec language, Nahuatl. Um, their very important thing happened is that they picked up an interpreter, a young lady who would speak both languages, both Mayan and Nahuatl. Um, this is the late year painting mural by Diego Rivera. We don't know what this lady um, real appearance was. There is very no uh, uh, painting of her done during her lifetime. We don't know what her original name was. Uh, to the Spaniards, she became Doña Marina, known by her Christian name, and in history, she's known as Le Malinche. At that point, she just was picked up as an interpreter, but her story is fascinating in her own rights, and we'll hear about her a lot. But um, at this point, we just say that Cortés was very happy to have somebody who spoke both Mayan language and the Nahuatl language, as was apparently very quick to learn Spanish. She was instrumental for the conquest. Armed in that way, finally in April 1519, as shown on the map, Velázquez arrived at the place that currently known as San Juan de Ulua. That's the place, the final destination of original Grijalva expedition, where Cortés, as Grijalva promised, is met with a big fanfare by the local people called Totonacs. Perhaps things were not as beautifully done as you can see on this image, very romanticized image overlaid today, but it is a fact that Totonacs were extremely happy to see white men coming. There were a lot of gifts, a lot of dancing, a lot of singing, great receptions. Totonacs remembered Grijalva. They claimed to be Christians, and what the most important message that they sent into uh, Cortés was, "Thank you very much for coming. We were waiting for you for so long. Please go ahead and deliver us from our evil overlords. Thank you for saving us." And Cortés like, "What? Come again?" "Well, thank you for coming and saving us from our evil overlords." And Cortés says, "Okay, all right. Talk to me about your evil overlords. We want to know everything. By the way, bring all that gold and silver that you prepare. Yes, store it here. Great, good job. Now talk to me." And so Totonacs talk. And imagine yourself at this point being Spaniards, being Cortés, and I am here, the chief Totonac, and I'm gonna talk to you and talk to you about um, our evil overlords. Our overlords are extremely evil and very powerful. We, Totonacs, are very small, humble, and peaceful nation. We are known for our ceremonies and also for that vanilla. Yes, that's what we do. Maybe not in the plastic battles. We're the first nation, first people on Earth to cultivate vanilla. We introduced it to Aztecs, to everyone, and then to Europeans. So thank you, Totonacs, for vanilla. Uh, but we're anything but warriors. We are always controlled by somebody. That's okay with us. But currently, we're being controlled by the really evil overlords, the Aztecs, that we call Mexica. Now, Aztecs were the barbarians from the north. If the people like Totonacs were living in central Mexico, what's now central Mexico, and we call it Mesoamerica, for at least 2,000 years, had the civilization for at least 2,000 years. Aztecs arrived from the north, from modern day United States, around the start of 13th century. They settled in that blue area on the map in the Valley of Mexico on an island inside the lake. Uh, and they built their city called Tenochtitlan, the city of dreams. And from there, over 300 years, they expanded to control most of modern day Mexico, from the Mayalands in the south to the mountains and deserts in the west and and the north. So they created a huge empire starting with the small island on the lake. The city itself, the capital, is said to be, or Totonax explained to Cortes, is magnificent. It has 200,000 people as population. Cortes cannot believe these numbers, but that happened to be true. Um, and so they ruled the empire from that beautiful city on the island, on the lake, surrounded by mountains in the Valley of Mexico. They have an army that Totonacs claimed to be at least 100,000 strong, and the population of the entire empire is nowadays estimated it was 15 million. Um, they the Aztecs, the Totonacs explain, have a very serious and very complicated social structures. They have a lot of technological advances. They have textiles. They great stonemasons. They have doctors. They had teachers. They have schools. They had theater. They had poetry that boys in school supposed to memorize. Um, they work soft metals, gold and silver, and the agriculture is amazing. Um, but there are also things that, of course, they don't have. They don't have will, except they do, but not using it for practical reasons. They had toys like Mickey Mouse over here. Um, they don't have a writing system, except they almost do. The pictograms were very close to be a proper writing system, and they were getting closer with every decade to have a real writing system. The thing they really didn't have was hard metals. They were barely entering Bronze Age. They had already known bronze, but they were producing very little of it. That thing over there is a natural size. I mean, that's not small things. That's actually bigger than on the image than it was. It was sort of kind of money. There was so little of it that it could be used as Aztec money. So here, and the last thing that Todd and Axe talked, and I'm gonna talk to you, um, is that wonderful person. Because however evil the Aztec are, they are ruled by the magnificent uh, emperor, the Tlaoli, the one who speaks, almost a god person, and emperor. His name is Montezuma, and he looks like that. That's of course the entire thing is a lie. Montezuma was an older person. He couldn't have metal European sword, and he was mostly looking like that. That's actually the image from Aztec codices. It was an older man without any particularly interesting appearance, and he was weak. And some people would criticize me for describing that way, but he was probably the weakest uh, emperor that Aztec ever had in 300 years uh, history. Um, Montezuma was not supposed to be an emperor. His brother was supposed to be an emperor. He was brought up to be the high priest, and only because of his brother death he became an emperor. But he was religious, even I mean, very religious, even by the Aztec standards. um, his rule was very not exactly devastating. There was no really regradation, but he brought the year. I mean, his rule was years of nothingness. He achieved nothing through his years, and there were a number of setbacks in Aztec's um, empire during his rule and due to his rule. He was not ruling by logic. He was not. His rule was not the rule by facts. He was looking for prophecies, for religious calendar to suggest what to do and how to do things. He was looking for signs and suggestions by the priest rather than his civil council or the military. He started the wars against the military and lost against the military um, advice of his military. He would not start the harvest because calendar wouldn't suggest so, and he would allow the rain to start and destroy the harvest, and the people would go hungry. He was not a particularly good ruler because in his rule all was about the prophecies and signs and not about the facts. He was also extremely into human sacrifices. Now, it needs to be understood that during the 2,000 years of living in Mesoamerica, the human sacrifice was nothing new for the people of Mesoamerica, for the original inhabitants of the lands, like Totonacs. Everybody does it. Aztecs, as when they established the empire and when they extend the empire, took it to the next level. And that didn't sit well with everyone, because Aztecs wouldn't sacrifice their own people. They would force their vassals, the people they conquer, to send people as a part of tribute, right? And people didn't like it because it's one thing then when you have to sacrifice your own people once in a while, once a year. It's a different thing when the Aztecs asking for people to be sent to the capital to be sacrificed to their gods every month. Um, and then Montezuma took it yet to the next level. So it was no surprise that the people like Totonacs were not happy with Aztecs rule at all. After listening all of that, dear Spaniards, I hope you put yourself into position of Cortés and realize that why for the first time since he started the expedition, he kind of feels unsure what to do next. He really likes the fact, Totonacs complain, that this huge civilization has a lot of gold and silver that they can get. He also likes the fact to be known, I mean, he would love to be known as somebody who conquer that empire and join it to the Spanish domains. But he didn't really expect to fight the army of potentially hundred thousands, even if not 100,000, if it's one third of those. 30,000 is pretty much huge now. It's a huge number compared to 500 warriors that he brought and 800 of Spaniards total. He is really unsure that he wants to do it. While he
Did
is
he?
unsure, he needed some sign,
I
some
have a
help.
question. Did he just not realize what he was getting himself into?
Say it again.
Did he just not realize what he was going against?
Not before he arrived. Because all the Grijava reports was that okay, there is this land, unlike Yucatan, that central Mexico is rich in gold and silver. Because look, the sport Totonacs, they don't have their own mines, but they easily trading all this gold and silver to us for pretty much nothing. So that central Mexico with the mountains and the good. Overall seems to be much better place than Yucatan, the weather-wise and the soil-wise, but it also has mountains with the gold and silver. But and there is some sort of civilization there. Carter certainly didn't know there's going to be 15 million inhabitants living somewhere there, and there's like 100,000 of them are the warriors, right? That's not something that he expected. So
Yes, he
now
didn't do
he's
his
thinking
research up front.
maybe he just gonna do what Grijava did. Let's just like trade for gold and silver with this nice Totonacs promise to return and get the hell out of here before they attack. But Aztecs didn't attack. Aztecs instead kind of may help Cortes make his mind. And that's actually what's happening a lot with the Spaniards during the conquest, but the first time it's probably happened to Cortes. Uh, Montezuma obviously learned very quickly. I mean, the help arrived from Montezuma himself. Montezuma learned very quickly about the white people, strange people coming and talking to the Totonacs, the troublemakers, the people who don't want to send a tribute to us. Um, and Montezuma got worried more than any of his councilmen, more any of his military men. He got worried, and that had to do a lot with him being so religious and looking for the prophecies. Pretty much like Game of Thrones, some people would look for the prophecies. There is particular legend that he was very kind of obsessed about. The legend of the god Quetzalcoatl, the flume serpent, the feathered serpent. That's a god that's a very important. It was very important god for the humankind because he is actually creator of humankind. He also the one who protects humans and um, helps them. He is the one who gave the human calendar. He's the one who gave humans corn. He loves humans in general and protects from other gods. But once in a while, he also needs to be fed. And one of the legends would say that some 150 years before Aztecs arrived, there was a young man uh, in the Toltec warrior who was also a prince, and he was an incarnation of God Quetzalcoatl on Earth, and he was tricked by other gods into the exile. The young prince, being also God, left eastwards and promised to return one day and take his place as a ruler back. And so Montezuma all of a sudden become obsessed with that idea. He believes that Cortes is that exiled young man slash god Quetzalcoatl who came back to take his place. How he's going to take place? Well, once in a while, Quetzalcoatl would ask for sacrifice, and this particular year, he's going to eat somebody important, namely me, Montezuma. Montezuma really doesn't want to be swallowed alive by the giant snake, just as you see over there. He doesn't want to. For many Aztecs, that would be an honor. Montezuma is actually older. He lived very long life compared to majority of the Aztecs. He was over 50 years old. Doesn't want to die. He doesn't want to be here. He wants his rule to end peaceful, and he dies of his natural causes. Being eaten by the swallowed by the giant snake is not one of them. The prophecies in Aztec world, again, like in Game of Thrones, you can deal with them, you can change them, you can like kind of get out of the things. You can deal with the gods. You can fight them. That he's afraid of doing. You can trick gods, as it has been done before, but can you really trick that god again? He doesn't feel powerful enough. How about I um, I conduct business. I will try to buy my freedom and my life. And so Montezuma decides to do that. He sends an embassy to the coast that travels for several weeks and delivers gifts and welcome and sort of uh, uh, um, uh, news from Emperor Montezuma to the leader of the white people, to Hernan Cortes. Um, that was a terrible mistake on Montezuma's side, but that's what he does. He brings a lot of gifts. Among other things, among food and clothes and ceramics, everything that they value, they also brought a lot of gold and silver. Moreover, the people who were included in the embassy were very people of importance, were members of the royal family. Uh, and they all, as Spaniards would say, carried gold and silver pieces on their important persons. I really like that translation always from their important persons. They were wearing a lot of gold and silver pieces. And Cortez was like, yeah, whatever you're saying is great. What do you want from me? And what they wanted, what Montezuma wanted, he wanted to Cortez to take all the gifts, ask for what else he wants, and then to leave back from where he came. Maybe come back at some another time. I know you got cattle. Come back another time. Take what's yours during the rule of another emperor. And Cortes obviously denies being a god, but he cannot. He's a real Christian. He's a Catholic. If he says that he tried to pretend to be God, he would be put to torch by his own crew. But so he denies that. And he explains that he is actually not a god. He's a human. He's a governor, Hernan Cortes. What it means is that there is one true God, Jesus Christ, and he arrived here to bring this news to his beloved brother Emperor Montezuma. So Montezuma needs to meet with Cortes. He needs to convert to Christianity, baptize the country, submit to the rule of the most wonderful Christian and Catholic king, the King of France, and recognize Cortes as his rightful representative. And once he does it, everything's going to be great. Nothing really changed. I just need to talk to you, man. And by the way, again, what is that your gold and silver pieces that you're carrying on your persons? Could you please just give it to me? Yeah, very good. Very good. Your ruler said that you should do as I say. Yeah, store them here. Thank you very much. This is nice. Could you please bring more? Yes, you know what? It's very funny. My friends are sick with heart disease. And the only thing that cures that, the best thing is a gold sand. Could you please ask your master to deliver some gold sand? Yeah, here's the cask. Yeah, take this one, take that helmet, this one, yeah, it's steel. Take it as a gift for your master, for the Emperor Montezuma. But the second one, fill it out with the gold sand and send it back. And so that happens. And the embassy leaves, the other embassy comes back, brings more gifts, brings more gold and silver, and they do deliver back um, the helmet, the steel helmet, filled out with the gold cent. And that was pretty much that set it. If there is the things that heals the heart sickness of Spaniards, if there is any cure for the homesickness, that's that bright yellow metal. Cartes' mind was immediately set, and so were set the minds of most of his soldiers. Wherever the danger is, there clearly so much gold and silver as those people willing to give us. We cannot just leave right now. That gold. That's one of the. Mostly, they actually. It is funny enough. They destroyed most of the gold pieces. They melted it, but this piece survived, and I will be using this image. That goal. So Cortes establishes he does what he needs to do legally. He establishes the first European settlement in Mexico called Veracruz. At that point, Villarica de Veracruz. Um, because some people didn't want to stay. The goal convinced most of them, but some people wanted to take one of the ships and go back to Cuba. Cortes punished those people who uh, had a conspiracy to do just that. He hanged a couple of conspirators who were going to take the ship, and the rest of the ships were famously burned. So nobody had really chance to go back. He destroyed the ships. At least in reality, he didn't burn anything. He just sunk them. He wasn't going for the spectacle. He just sunk them. But in the pop culture, we all know that he actually burned the ships. There's like movies about that. So I picked up this unrealistic image because that actually never happened. He sunk the ships and he made one of his famous speeches about going forward to death, but most probably to glory, bringing the salvation to savages and new lands for the kings, songs to be sung, riches to be had, yada, yada, yada. And people followed him. Now, Cortes started moving to his goal after he left in August of 1519 from Veracruz. His goal is that island on the Lake Chechico and the Valley of Mexico. He cannot travel straight forward there. There's two major reasons for the zigzagging path that you can see. The green here, the green line, the green non-line here, the curve here. One reason is that he tries to avoid um, narrow mountain passes because if Montezuma does send army to fight him in the battle to be had, he'd rather do it in the open field where his cavalry is most effective. Um, so he goes around the mountain ridges as much as possible. And the other thing is that he needs to go through the settlements to loot, to have place to sleep, to have food. Totonacs taking him through the territories that they know are unhappy with Aztec rule. They taken them through potential allies. And it's more important not because for the safety, but because, funny enough, even though Cortes' mind is now set by seeing so much gold, his army's minds are set by seeing so much gold, but the original reason for hesitation is still there. He is still to face huge number of Aztecs warriors. They still need to fight them. Just being wanting to that doesn't mean that he can prevail. So he needs numbers. He needs allies. So he's trying to pick up allies along the way. And the most important meeting, the most important potential allies, they stay in the middle of the map. I'm not sure if you can see my pointer. The place called Tizatlan, more than the halfway um, into the Valley of Mexico. Tizatlan is the home to the very interesting people called Tlaxcala, still live to today's day. Tlaxcalans were relatives of Aztecs, let's say third cousins. They were also barbarians from the north who spoke the same Nahuatl language, the newcomers to Mesoamerica. They were very similar to Aztecs. They had their own valley that they settled. They were fiercely independent folks. Once Aztec established their empire, they were able to subjugate Tlaxcalans for time being, and then Tlaxcalans revolt. And then the revolt was put down by Aztecs, and they revolted again. That cycle was going on all the time. And lucky for Cortes, at the time as he was traveling through the territory, Tlaxcalans had one of their revolts. They were in open rebellion against the Aztecs. Uh, Tlaxcalans, when they learned about the approaching of Cortes, originally didn't want to have anything with him. Their idea was, we've been fighting Aztecs for all those years successfully. Why do we need some allies? Why do we need new overlords or something? So they actually tried to fight Cortes. They staged 3 battles and they lost all of them. despite having superior numbers, and that changed their mind. They welcomed Cortes, saying, "All right, that was a misunderstanding. We got it. You have a point. Let's do an alliance." And so Cortes arrived um, into the capital, and turns out there was no trap. The Tlaxcalans really decided that that would be beneficial for them to have the allies like those powerful um, people. There was a famous meeting, pretty much like on this mural of all the Spaniards, Cortes, Alvarado, Sandoval on the right, on the left, Tlaxcalans elders, and Donna Malinche translating in the middle. Tlaxcalans quickly accepted Christianity, and from that point on became Spaniards' most reliable, most dependable, most staunch allies who were with them through life and death, through good and bad, and were extremely loyal. And interestingly enough, Spaniards were loyal to them as well. They really treated them as a very good friends. Very unusual thing in the relationship between Spain and locals. While Cortes was uh, regrouping and getting rest in Tlaxcala, he receives another embassy. Unexpectedly receives another embassy from Montezuma. And the message that Montezuma receives is like that. Okay, dear, dear Governor Cortes, that's your beloved friend Montezuma is writing. I got it. You're human. I'm not gonna call you God anymore if you don't like it. It's fine. And I got it that you need to come and talk to me about the new God and the Spanish king that I need to submit to. It's all cool. How about you wait for a month? I need to prepare my people. There are festivals and activities that's going on right now. It's better you don't see them. Um, just come in 1 month's time. By the way, why do you stay in this terrible uh, war act place, Tlaxcala, with the dog people that we really don't like, the Tlaxcalans, they're all thieves, they're all liars. Don't stay with them. Go to the nearby um, city of Cholula. Cholulans are noble people, very, uh, very good folks, very highbrow, and they were all very noble people and rich too. So go there. They will provide. We direct them to provide the best lodging, the best food. I know you've been away from your woman, so you'll get that too. Don't worry. And we know how it works. And I have 120 wives, by the way. That's true. I had 120 wives, and so go there, go to Cholula, and stay there for that month. Obviously, Cortes suspects a trap. Donna Malinche says it's a trap. Tlaxcalan says it's a trap. Cholulans just the Aztecs allies. They're just gonna do something bad to us. But Cortes decides to go to Cholula anyway. Everything is true. Cholula is very noble, beautiful, good food, wonderful drinks, very low alcohol content. Um, great lodging, great palaces, wonderful pyramid, and of course there was a trap. Chalons were instructed by Montezuma to to catch Spaniards off guard as they will be sleeping or drinking in their hammocks, tie them up, disable them, bring them to the capital. We're going to sacrifice them. Once there was sufficient proof that was would be going that's what Chalulans planned, and the final undeniable proof delivered by Dona Marina by Malinche, Cortes acted first. He managed to trick Chalulans to assemble on the main square uh, in front of the temple to Quetzalcoatl and massacred about 400 people. With all the Cholula noblemen and their families, regardless of age or sex, were massacred by Spaniards. Uh, the Spanish soldiers, were quite shocked at what they were asked to do. They didn't want to, but they would obey the orders. But they were like kind of shocked after that. Cortes explained it at that time to the soldiers and later on to um, to the authorities that he had to do it once, so he won't have to do it again. If we show any weakness, that would be very bad, and they would continue to try to get us into trap. He would say, By doing that atrocity once, I made sure that nothing like that needed to happen again. That was his excuse, and it sort of worked in the terms nobody ever again tried to follow up at Stack's uh, asking and try to trick Cortez like that. And also Cortez didn't need to commit atrocities quite like that ever again, at least himself. But I'm not judging here. I'm just giving you the facts, the story. I mean, of course, it was terrible. They killed babies, but that's what happened in that history. Now, um, after this event took place and the news came to the capital, Montezuma had another meeting with his military council, with his religious council, and with his civil council. And the military says, "Well, Your Majesty, you tried to bargain with them, didn't work. You tried to trick them, didn't work. The only option is to fight them." And surprisingly, they got support by the priests who were saying, "Well, while killing Cholula noblemen, they also destroyed the temple to Quetzalcoatl. No god would destroy the temple to himself or any other temples to any gods. So clearly, just a man. Go ahead and fight it. Cortez doesn't. I mean, sorry, Montezuma doesn't have it in him anymore to stand against the opinion of his councilman, and he authorized the army to march. Um, Cortez realizes that. He realizes that after the trap didn't work and after he's clearly making alliance with Tlaxcalans, they're probably going to be a war. Um, the major highway at that time wasn't from Talan that you see at the bottom of the screen and over here, and the Valley of Mexico was going sort of like this, was going to the eastern shore of the lake. Was the only big road and the road that Cortez was presumably to take. And that's where the Aztecs army was going. The road was by itself guarded by the garrison, and also the huge army of at least 30,000 people was marching from the capital. Cortez didn't want to do it, so he asked if there is another road. There was no other road. Then Cortez asked, what about those two mountains that we see to the west? Popocatépetl and uh, White Woman is a Wattle. Marina's smiling, and I know because we just saw it last January during my last trip to Mexico with them. We saw those two wonderful mountains. Popocatépetl was smoking. It's an active volcano. So Cortez asked, "What about them?" And Tlaxcalans like, "Well, those are sacred mountains. We never approached them." And Cortez, "But can we go around? I mean, in between?" Nobody ever done that before. They say it's forbidden, but that's what we're going to do, says Cortez. And that's what they do. Instead of going the high road, or the low road around the mountains, as he previously did, he goes in between those two volcanoes that you see. And apparently, volcanoes did nothing to destroy him. The gods were smiling at him, and there were no road. Now there is a road that appropriately called Paso de Cortez, honoring the man who first crossed it. And so Cortez surprised Aztec military. Instead of marching right at them by the only big road or arriving to the Valley of Mexico in northeast, he arrived at the south. Montezuma is crying, both laughing and crying, and he talks to his council and says, "You see, I we couldn't do anything. We cannot um, I couldn't buy him off. I couldn't trick him. Now you couldn't even stage the war against him. He is a god. I know one god or another. And now he is here in the Valley of Mexico. That's Valley of Mexico in 1519, mostly covered by the series of lakes. Now all of those lakes are gone except for the small lake Xochimilca and the south. And Cortez is right here in the place Coyoacan at the bottom of Lake uh, Texaco on its southwestern shores, right? And Cortez sends the message to Montezuma saying, "Well, I'm here. Remember, you said I can come, so here I am. I would like to visit you on the island." And pretty much Montezuma says, "Yes, you can come. even though his councilman still thinks it's crazy. Montezuma by that time totally destroyed. He believes that Cortes can do anything, and if he wants to come, he should be allowed. Um, Now, the Tenochtitlan, the city of dream, is built on the island, and um, it is connected to the shores by several viaducts. The Lake Texaco was the shallow one, 4 to 5 meters at the deepest points, and so the viaducts were the stone platforms, wide enough for 3 to 4 horses to go in a row. But they not continuous. There are holes in between various platforms, as you can see, and they are being breached by the wooden bridges. And this is done so that the bridges can be removed, can be raised, and the canoe can travel from one part of the lake to another. And those viaduct, or rather one that goes to the south, was to be taken to Cortes. And it was on very fateful day on November 8th of year 1519, Cortes and Spaniards, in what they hoped to be very powerful presentation of their force, march from the settlement of Cayocan uh, through the southern viaduct the into Tenochtitlan, the city of dreams, and the famous meeting, or the fateful meeting, between Hernan Cortes and Montezuma, the first meeting of those two uh, men of history, they took place. Now, it wasn't happening the way this later day image shows up. Nobody was pointing the fingers or showing the swords. The meeting was very cordial. Uh, the speeches were made. The declarations of friendship were made, and the gifts were exchanged. Uh, Aztecs received different glass things that they didn't care at all. Spaniards got gold pieces and silver pieces, as well as food and clothing that they care for. Um, During this meeting and during subsequent dinner the following night, Cortes would demand, however, nicely and politely he was asking Montezuma whether he accepts the Christianity and, more importantly, the rule of his Spanish overlord, so the rule of uh, uh, crown of Spain. Most probably, Montezuma didn't exactly understand whatever Malinche was translating. Nobody knows, and by that time, she was translating the way she felt needed to be translated. She stopped being just a translator. She became kind of Cortes's um, advisor and confidant. Um, and she was given the carte blanche to translate the way she felt needed to be translated, at least in the complicated situation. But even if he understood, nobody knows whether Malinche was understanding the court know at all properly. They had quadruple negation in the statement sometimes. Uh, but the way she translated is yes, Montezuma accepts the rule of Spanish crown. Everybody's happy, at least for time being. Um, Cortes and his folks were given a residence in the old Montezuma Palace, the palace that used to be occupied by Montezuma's father, the previous emperor, which is more like a castle with the huge walls uh, and very heavy um, uh, gates, and overall the space that is very easy to defend as long as your enemies do not have firearms and guns, which obviously Indians didn't have. So Cortes is very happy about that. Right in the center of the ceremonial, I mean, right in the ceremonial center, right in the middle of the city, in the most important part of the city, pretty much across uh, Montezuma's own residence. Overall, Spaniards are extremely shocked and pleased by what they see. Tenochtitlan is a huge city built on the grid, nothing like they ever seen, clean, orderly, lots of stone buildings, pyramids, palaces, platforms, and all very brightly colored. Given that most of these people were village boys, and even somebody who've been to Seville, the biggest city in Spain, Seville was 60,000 strong. This was the city of 200,000. So obviously Spaniards like what they see, and interesting. The mind of conquistadors of the time, the Iberian mind, was very interesting. Interesting. When like locals, the people from the provinces, the Indian from the provinces, would get to the capital for whatever business or the trade, they would be kind of they felt the power of Aztecs, people who built such a magnificent city. They feel the need to kind of kneel and feel inferior. The Spaniards' mind was like, great, so much to loot, so much to take home, so much to steal. Let just where's my gold? This look beautiful. I want a piece of it. Um, um, this is an image of a ceremonial center. The image to the left is the palace. It was really strong. Cortez was very happy. So for time being, however, they can't really loot everything. Moreover, the Spanish soldiers become concerned. They became concerned. Um, it's great. We got here, Cortez having the wonderful discussions and, and dines with the emperor, and emperor seems to like us, and it's all wonderful. But look, his army is coming back to the city. All the story thousand warriors now coming back to the city. The city is huge, and the people here clearly doesn't like us. We just came here without proper invitation, and it's not clear what we're going to do. It's not clear what they think. What if Montezuma changes his mind and he doesn't like us tomorrow? Are we going to be fighting all those people? It's great that supposedly he's giving us gold and silver. Cortez keeps accumulating that. It's even better that turns out there was a sealed room in our palace that even Mutsu's a real story. They found the treasure that belonged to the father. Montezuma didn't really care. There was a lot of gold and silver stored in his father's old palace. Spaniards found that. So yeah, we have a lot of gold and silver, but what if things change? And Cortez goes, shh, I'm the one with the brains. You just do as I say. I'll tell you guys, there's a plan. And the plan is centered around this man. Yes, you know what we're going to do? We're going to take him prisoners. And his captains, Alvarades and all, like, come again, what we're going to do? We're going to take the Emperor Montezuma prisoner. Think about that. Nobody ever done that before. It's crazy, right? We come in here as a guest, everybody likes us, we guest of honor, then we're like, oops, and here's us, and he's our prisoner. Brilliant, huh? What are they going to do? And that's what they did. I was as audacious as it gets, as crazy. Nobody ever done that before. Cortez did. He used a pretense. He needed to pretend. I mean, some reason, pretense reason, and he got it. Apparently, some Spaniards got killed uh, in, on the shore in Villarica de Veracruz. There was attack by the Aztecs on Totonacs. Totonacs asked for help. Spaniards that promised help to their Christian brothers got killed too, defending Totonacs. Cortes is furious, Spanish life is sacred, but he also kind of like it because, well, now he has, I mean, some people died. Now they're going to be martyrs, and we have reasons to do what we came here to do. He takes 30 of his most dependable conquistadors and runs to uh, Montezuma Palace, past the guards. He gets to his quarters and he pretty much confronts Montezuma, saying, I don't know whether you authorized the killing of my friends or not, but you have to pay for that. And Montezuma asking Malinche what exactly that means, and Malinche replies at that point, without even like asking Cortes, so you see all those people, they came here to kill you. The only thing that stands between you and death is governor, your true friend, Hernan Cortes. So why don't you just do what he says? Like, what does he want me to do? He wants you to go and be his guest and owner in his residence in your old palace. And Cortes, I cannot do it. I'm like, well, then you die. He should have died at that point. He should have called the guards, should have honorably sacrificed himself, does something. That would be his end, but that would be the end of Cortes. And who knows how the history would develop from there. But Montezuma, the old by Aztec standards, somebody who many at his court couldn't wait for, die of natural causes already, and let the country develop in the proper way again, not being religiously ruled. Um, he doesn't want to die, and so he agrees. He actually came up with a plan. He says, what are we going to do? Don't put iron on me. Don't be hostile to me. Put me on a litter. Carry me, as some people, call my slaves. They would carry me with all the grandeur. And I'll announce that I just gonna visit you and stay with you, because as I'm accepting the new gods, because your gods are more powerful, or God, single God, fine, wherever you call him, and I'm accepting your crown, your as my overlords, your king and queen as my overlords. I need to stay with you and learn your tradition and learn your about your God, and so I'll be just staying there. And so they would. That's what they do, and that 1 week, or rather 8 days after arriving at the capital as the guest of honor, Hernan Cortes and his conquistador took the head of the foreign empire prisoner. Absolutely unbelievable, but that's what happened. Now, over the course of next several months, and Cortes stayed in capital like that for another 5 months, Montezuma clearly developed what we now call Stockholm syndrome. He was really sympathizing with Spaniards. He really was like needy and attaching himself to develop the attachment to Cortes. He wanted his presence all the time. He wanted to play games with him, talk to him. For Cortes, he just was useful. I mean, he was a curiosity, but mostly was useful. Um, there were also practical reasons why Montezuma now found himself kind of okay staying in the palace with Cortes. He continued to rule his empire, and that was a bit much better than he originally expected. He expected the giant snake to swallow him alive. Now here he is ruling the empire. He is allowed all the visitors that he wants. If military comes, or like council comes, Malinchos and other interpreters would be there all the time, not allowing any sort of conspiracy, but he can rule the empire. He's allowed a lot of slaves. He allowed 20 wives, and he can bring more if he wants. He is actually married yet another girl while staying in this palace. Um, so not much change. And um, the only thing that Spaniards seem to be interested is gold. So while he delivers the gold, and there is plenty of it to deliver, he continued to run the empire. Also, it turns out that there was a conspiracy on his life by his cousin Prince Kakama, who had enough all this, uh, I'm sorry, bullshit, all these foreign invaders walking around our city. We should take care of them. Montezuma clearly is not doing that. Prince Kakama um, started a conspiracy to replace Montezuma with himself. Somebody read it, and Spaniards took care of that event. And Montezuma was even in his twisted way. He became grateful uh, to Cortes for saving his life, even though none of that would happen if he wasn't friendly with Spaniards in the first place. Um, Now I jumped a little bit, but let's put that way. So 5 months passed. During these 5 months, Spaniards feel very comfortable because nobody's gonna do anything against them, while Montezuma stays in their kind of possession, being their prisoners, but still the emperor of the empire and still rules everyone. Nobody says the worst against him except for the nobleman that tried the conspiracy, but mostly things going as they were going before, and Cortes keeps accumulating the riches. The only question there that soldiers start to ask is what we're going to do next. We're not actually gaining any territory. We're not fighting anyone, right? We're just accumulating wealth. What we're going to do with that? Cortes had a plan, but he didn't have a chance to reveal that plan. Um, and that was because, well, he didn't have a chance. He got the news from the coast again. And the people about, I mean, the responsible for change of events that things didn't go according to Cortes' plan was his old friend uh, Diego Velasquez, and he's another old friend who we don't know yet, the person by the name Panfilo de Narvaez. De Narvaez was old acquaintance of both of Cortes and Velasquez. He was old conquistador, or was experienced conquistador who also participated in the conquest of Cuba alongside Velasquez and Cortes. But then he returned to back to Spain and became a very successful businessman there. Now, A year after Cortes departed, the political situation changed, and Velasquez all of a sudden was given the authority by the king to perform conquest of Mexico. Let's say that Columbus went out of favor. So all of a sudden, Velasquez didn't need to pretend anymore. So what he does, he contacts his old friend Panfido del Narvaez and asks him to participate in another expedition. Velasquez is now not concerned; he's officially authorized by king to do it. The Narvaez sees a lot of opportunity in that, so he returns back from Spain back to Cuba with his own fleet of 12 ships and Spaniards and North Africans to fight in Mexico. And he is sent by Velasquez to Mexico on expeditions with that has two goals. First, arrest that rebel Hernan Cortes, kill him or bring him in iron because he went on an unauthorized expedition, and then conquer the Mexico on my behalf. The Narvaez arrives on the coast, gets to uh, Totonac's territory, and immediately alienates everyone. Unlike Cortes, he is not smart enough to make friends with Indians. He is very disrespectful to them. Totonacs don't like it. They complain to Tlaxcalans. Tlaxcalans try to talk sense to the Narvaez to know there's no way to do that. So they send a message to Cortes and inform him of the new development and that there's new white people who don't seem to like Cortes much, but also they not behaving properly. Cortes tries to resolve the situation with the Narvaez peacefully. When the Narvaez responds negatively, Cortes, great. Actually, when I just try to be good Christian and good Spaniards, and that's why I was offering him like peaceful terms. The war is what I like. Cortes leaves Pedro de Alvarado and 100 least dependable men in the capital to keep guard of Montezuma and keep things calm. And with the rest of them, with another 100 men, marches to the coast. He marches through the day to night, no stops. He has all the intelligence as he needs because he has been friendly with Indians and have allies. He surprised the Narvaez superior force with sharp nighttime attack. He goes straight to his uh, camp. His soldiers overrun the Narvaez's guards, and he takes the Narvaez prisoner. The Narvaez tries to fight back to his honor, and for that he gets the dagger to his eye. So the Narvaez there, Cortes's prisoner, half alive, half dead, half blind. Once that was taken care of, Cortes calls the General Assembly of the Narvaez forces, and the forces pretty huge. They have 1,200 people, 1,200 warriors to 500 Corteses. They had, more importantly, 80 horses brought from Spain to Cortes's 13 at the time. They also had a lot of guns and gunpowder. So Cortes would really like to add it. So he makes one of his famous speeches, cult speeches, about the glory and the songs and the riches and the kings and bringing salvation to the salvages. But mostly he talks, to be honest, about gold and silver, and he throws the different like pieces of trinkets into the crowd and talks to people about joining him. Uh, the most of them join Cortes quite eagerly. Cortes is victorious, but um, he doesn't have much time to celebrate because he gets message from the coast from the capital that informs him that it's look like that Aztecs actually rebelled and his friend Pedro Alvarado is in trouble. Cortes cannot leave his friends in trouble, and he marches all his new big army back to the capital, to Tenochtitlan. Um, he gets to the capital. He sees no resistance. He experienced no resistance. He travels through the country unopposed. He travels through the viaducts unopposed. He traveled through the city of Tenochtitlan to its ceremonial center without any resistance. He gets into the palace, where Pedro Alvarado and Montezuma supposedly there. He sees Pedro Alvarado well and alive. He's very joyful about that. And then he sees, like, from by some magic from everywhere, the Aztecs warriors start pouring into the ceremonial center and surround the palace. So Cortez wants some explanation from his friend Pedro Alvarado. Pedro Alvarado says, "Well, you know how it's May of months of May right now, November to April to May, 5 months. Yes. So what's about that? It's the worst months apparently. I mean, it is the worst month in central Mexico, very hot and very dry. During the months of May, the festival of dedicated to uh, Toxcatl, the god of the smoke and mirror god, the omnipresent god who really doesn't like human race. He's kind of anti Quetzalcoatl, takes place. The Toxcatl brings dry a season, and he would not leave until he appeased. So for 3 weeks there is a festival during which people dance, meditate, drum, consume alcoholic and hallucinogenic substances, and then, of course, sacrifice people. It happens all across the country, and the most important celebrations are taking place, of course, in the ceremonial center in the capital, right in front of the palaces, right in front of the palace where Spaniards are staying. Um, it turns out that while uh, people were in, as festival started, while the people were drumming and dancing, uh, Spaniards were just amused. But once the young youth start to be sacrificed to appease the god Texcatl, uh, turns out that was too much for the uh, uh, very tender soul of the beast Pedro Alvarado. Pedro Alvarado was known throwing people um, from the roofs and balconies and putting them on fire and putting them in iron for information of gold, but apparently shedding blood and killing people for the pagan rituals was too much to him, and he decided to stop that thing. And the only way he knew to stop thing is to let his fully armed uh, warriors to enter the plaza from the palace and pretty much slaughter everyone who was there. Um, over 1,000 people were killed within the months. They just went on the rampage that nobody can really explain why the Spaniards felt a need to kill everyone. The thing was, in addition to being the huge massacre that didn't need to happen at all, the people who Pedro Alvarado and his 100 least dependable soldiers killed that day, that hour, were not just regular people. That was that ceremony conducted by the most important people in the country on the most important plaza in the country. They were members of a royal family, everyone of importance in the royal family, all the wives, sisters, cousins, brothers of Montezuma who were not with him in the palace at the moment, all the high priests of the country, and most of the military. They all were killed. Once the news of that atrocity reached the population of the town, people could not contain themselves anymore and they surrounded the palace. They would not attack because the emperor was still there, but they would not let Pedro Alvarado leave. That the situation was going on for 2 weeks at that point, um, and um, and they seemed to despair and disappear only for a short while this very day when Cortes came from the coast. Apparently, Aztecs decided to let Cortes to join his friends, and so now they all were surrounded by the crowd, most of which were the Aztec warriors. Um, Alvarado explained to Cortes that he forced Montezuma at some point to go to the balcony. Montezuma refused because he called Pedro Alvarado a dog and blaming him for killing his relative and his family. Alvarado put the rope around his neck and pretty much dragged him to the balcony and forced him to plead. That didn't really work. It actually had a very different effect that Alvarado expected because it seemed that now, as after the emperor pleaded for his life and pleaded with the people to go home and let Spaniards be, that the people start losing respect to their leader. Cortes was furious with everyone, most of all with Alvarado, but there was no good at keep yelling and screaming at him. He went to talk to Montezuma at this point, and he asked Montezuma what's going on, and he said, "Well, people want you dead, understandably. Your people just massacred the most important uh, noblemen and most important people and most important priests in our country. There is no way they will disappear peacefully. You crazy." Um, and it seems from his answers and the way he behaved that all his affection and all his attachment to Cortes were gone. He was actually quite looked a destroyed man at that point, but he also didn't feel any affection for Cortes. Cortes pressed with the practical matters. He said, "Who can force them to leave? Why don't you go one day not listening to you?" And they say, "Well, they don't believe I'm the emperor anymore. The way, uh, because I let you in, the way I handled the things, and mostly after I pleaded with them to go home for my life and their lives, they don't consider me an emperor anymore." Why don't they attack then? Cortes asked. "Well, they don't have a leader. They don't have an emperor." Um, and then Cortes asked who can be the next emperor, and can the next emperor force them to disappear? And Montezuma replied that yes, there's one person who can be the next emperor. That would be his brother Cuauhtémoc, that survived only because he was with uh, Montezuma during the massacre on the plaza during the festival. Um, and that's the only image. Well, there are two images of him, but we don't have any image of his likeness really. He hasn't been painted over, and there are reasons for that. But Cortes didn't want to Cuitlahuac for various reasons to become an emperor, but it seems there were no choice. It seemed that there were no any other member, any other brother, or any other cousin left alive to become an emperor. Everybody else was slaughtered during the festival by Pedro Alvarado. According to tradition, the next emperor would needed to perform some rituals outside the ceremonial center, and Cortes agreed to release Cuauhtémoc to become next emperor, assuming that Cuauhtémoc would direct uh, Aztecs to leave. That was a big mistake. That was the first and potentially the last time when anybody was able to dupe Cortes quite like that. Especially, it was funny that it came from Montezuma as his only act uh, of defiance and the only act of revenge. Um, Cuauhtémoc had no interest in saving his brother's life. He was a part of original Kakama conspiracy, and he hated Spaniards long before the massacre. He was one of the generals who wanted to fight them from the start. So once Cuauhtémoc was released, joined Aztec's army and became its leader, the real siege started right away. That was a dull affair because Aztecs would be throwing rocks and spears at the walls, not causing much damage, and the Spaniards would be firing guns and arquebus back at them, but Spaniards couldn't leave the palace either. Any attempt to open the gates and let the cavalry go, there was just so many people at the gates. They would kill the horses by sheer numbers. They would jump in of the people, and people would be killed. So it was siege, and Cortes understood that the Aztecs don't need to get inside. They just gonna die of hunger and thirst because the supplies were running low. After all, Pedro Alvarado was there for 2 weeks already. Um, at this point, Cortes, um, at this point, Cortes decided to take a page from Alvarado's book and try to use Montezuma one more time, he dragged Montezuma to the balcony and had him talk to his people, asking to go home and stop the siege. And that's where the somewhat anticlimactic end to uh, uh, to the life of great Emperor Montezuma happened, as he was Montezuma once again, forced by Spaniards, was pleading with his people to stop attack, to go to disperse and to go home. A rock was thrown at him and hit him in the forehead. Boom! A rock to the head. Um, Montezuma uh, went down, bleeding. He was still alive. He was taken to his room and died. Died by the rock thrown by his own uh, disaffected uh, uh, people. He died. The Aztec, the great Aztec emperor, died from the rock thrown by another Aztec. Or at least that's the Spanish story. The Aztecs, uh, folks who would work later on with Spanish monks, uh, would insist that Montezuma survived, that he didn't die uh, of that rock hitting him in the head, that he survived, but then Spaniards used the opportunity to finish him, and they were Spaniards who killed it. The truth will never be known. Every single Spaniard that was interrogated later by the Spanish authorities in Hispaniola, on Cuba, or back in Spain, those who returned back to Spain, they were interrogated about the events. The royal family or the king of Spain at that time didn't take it lightly at all that an emperor of the state that of any state, but especially the state that was accepting the Spanish crown as their overlords, was killed by some rough men, by people without any education and any stance in the society. The kings didn't like that at all. First, they started killing emperors in the faraway lands, and then they start revolutions over here. Um, but all the Spaniards that were interrogated, all the conquistadors, stuck to the story. Rock to the head, to his room, tried to save, bled to death. Couldn't do anything. We tried. Poor man, really liked us. We so much gold and silver. We like him. Rock to the head. Yeah, rock to the head. No, we didn't kill him. That may be very well that they understood that if they deviate from the story, there's going to be bad consequences for them. Or maybe it was the truth. We will never find out. But one way or another, the great Emperor Montezuma, or not so great Emperor Montezuma, died by the hands of his people. Um, that was the end for Montezuma. That was not the end for Cortes, but I feel like that perhaps is the end for tonight's presentation because we're on our hour and a half. Um, and this is a great point. And if you guys are interested, and well, this is the end of the Cortes of Montezuma stories. There is another part of what happened to Cortez, but I will be very happy to share that second part with you through the recording. I think for tonight we have that cliffhanger. Uh, the Montezuma is gone, but what happened to besiege Cortez, you can find out from the recording. Um, I don't know how that happened. I really tried to make it in 1.5, but I didn't. Um, if you have any questions, guys, I'm ready to stay here for another 15 minutes, I guess, and answer the questions. Alina, is this okay of a result that
That's
everybody's gonna
perfect
get the
timing. I'm very impressed.
that we will finish? I mean, whoever cares to hear the end of the story, I will share the recording, or maybe we can have another session.
Thank you very
Max,
much, Zhe. Thank you. It
Yeah, no,
was
it was
great
great.
as usual.
I have a question.
go ahead.
At which point did epidemics come in?
Um, in another um, in another 5 months, um, it will become kind of start being evident, but that jumping for the second part. But yeah, it will play the huge role eventually. It will play the huge role, it hasn't started yet. Um, just kind of not giving too much. Cortez's people and his original crew, none of them was sick, and they didn't spread the disease. The disease came later with the Narvaez forces, because the Cuba was at the time of Cortes departure smallpox free, but Europe wasn't. So both the men from Spain and from North Africa carried the smallpox, and they spread it eventually. But it would not become evident. It would not be force for another 5 months at least.
Thank you.
Sure.
I
Questions,
have,
guys?
yeah, I have a different question. When did this lake get covered over?
When did it disappear?
Yeah.
So interestingly enough, some of the Aztecs emperors started working on on drying it. It didn't work very well. The reason they tried to dry it is because there would be um, um, sometimes the water level would go up too much and causing problems. But Aztecs engineering didn't work out very well. The emperor had to actually apologize to his people for causing more trouble than needed. Then Spaniards worked on drying parts of it. The last of it was removed in 1964 during the socialist rule. Interestingly enough, on the main plaza of Mexico City, on one of the corners, there is a monument dedicated to the engineering works to remove the water from the valley or put it underground, kind of.
Huh.
So the last of it was gone. The last of engineering work was done in 1964.
Okay.
But wasn't it flooded back then?
Sorry?
What do you mean? It
Like
was a
what?
lake.
Yeah,
Like what?
it used to be a series of lakes. There is no water anymore, except for the north and southern part. The Xochimilco Lake still there. More questions, guys?
What is your favorite part of this whole story?
What's my favorite part of the whole story? Um, I know. I feel the whole story is extremely um I've been telling this story for 10 years. I've read all the eyewitness accounts, and there are few of them, not many, but there are few of them that are available. Most of them people don't even care to republish anymore. And there is a lot of research. And still, when I read that or when I telling the story, I had to kind of employ the suspension of disbelief, even to myself. It sounds absolutely incredible that something that started with 500 conquistadors, entering the territory and trying to fight the huge empire and then being successful about it. It was that it's crazy. Um, I do often, like, since it's the part of my life all the time, I think a lot what could have been done differently, what Aztec should have done differently to prevent that from happen. I do realize that eventually Spain would be victorious one way or another. If not that expedition, then another expedition um, would put the end to the Aztecs' rule over the territories. Like once Spaniards saw so much gold and silver, there was no end to that. But but yeah, I just feel the whole thing is very surreal that it happened.
Just because of the numbers? I mean, because the Spaniards, just with the sheer weaponry they had, like you said, they definitely had a good chance of succeeding eventually.
Well, yeah, but true that. But there were, like, certainly if the Aztecs acted first, as Cortez was traveling, he had to go through some mountain passes, as Incas would prove later on. Even though they were not as serious warriors as Aztecs were, they eventually were able to put resistance using using various techniques. That Montezuma was just mostly like, I do nothing. I know nothing about that, and that was the craziest part. Um, I mean, when Tlascalans fought Spaniards, the last battle that they had was 5,000 people against 500, and Spaniards won, but they didn't feel it was very easy. Certainly, if the few, if there was the army of 10,000 or 20,000 Aztecs warriors, which they certainly could assemble, plus they had allies, that they probably could stop Cortes. Um, but it didn't happen.
Igor, thank you for the great lecture, but I have a question about Marina. What happened to her? I've heard somewhere that her life story didn't go well.
Her life story actually went well. There was till the research done by Hugh Thomas, the British actually historian. He it was believed till the late 1970s. I mean, it wasn't like her story was bad, but obviously Cortes couldn't marry her. He married somebody else, and then she died during the expedition to Honduras. That actually not the case. Thomas discovered lots of letters in Barcelona archives about what happened to her. She was married to. Um, she, I usually talk about the after stories at the end, but breaking, yeah, her life story ended well. Cortes had her married to one of the conquistadors. He received huge deal of money from him, lands, uh, haciendas, slaves originally, though the slavery was eventually outlawed. But um, she was a rich woman and she was very respected. And she had husband. She had children with Cortes. Then turns out that's the new discovery that she had more children with her second husband, who apparently treated her well. Um, her life story was ended well. Yeah, there are still historical, like there is haciendas that you can visit that she owned, and then there was quite a fight among her children for her inheritance, because she had like total 8 of them, and they all wanted a piece of her huge inheritance.
Wow.
She's maybe what you heard, that she's hated by in popular culture and by many Mexicans as a traitor, but it's a different story. I think
In,
quite unfairly.
in the book of Dutch Montezuma, Montezuma's daughter, that's how they portrayed that
I
she
see.
ended
Right,
up
right.
being.
I never actually read that, but I've heard that was a part uh, of the literature I should have read when I was a kid, but I didn't.
Thank you.
Sure. Guys, I didn't actually, like, when we started, there was like few people. I didn't realize there were so many. So thank you for attending. I guess apologies that I did not run out of time. I always do it, though I did prepare to do it in hour and a half, but eventually I went with details. I will share the second part as a recording. Some people said it's better in the sense that you can pause it at any time and then and then restore.
Thank you very much, Zhe. Thank you. Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. That was really good.
All right.
Thank
Thanks,
you. Thank
Alina.
you,
I really
Zhe.
appreciate you
Bye.
having me here.
Having you
Thank
come
you.
back with part 2.
Yeah.
We
Jay,
can
let's
do
do part
that.
two.
Let's do part 2.
Oh, there is Mr. Om.
Okay. Bye.
Bye, guys. Alina, I swear, I was
I know.
about to do it an hour and a half.